Some days just come and go. And then you get a day that feels like a decade's worth of history just got slammed into 24 hours. February 23rd, 2026? Yeah, that was one of those days. I mean, look at this number. The day ended with the Dow in a total freefall, dropping over 820 points. But honestly, that number, as huge as it looks, it doesn't even begin to tell the whole story. So you gotta be asking, right? What just happened? How did all of these different things, we're talking the courts, global politics, and crazy tech, all collide on a single Monday? To figure that out, we've got to break this day down piece by piece. All right, let's get into it. Okay, here's the game plan. We'll start with that single day of turmoil and the power clash in Washington. Then we'll dive into the economic fallout, look at the security threats that were just bubbling up, and break down a whole new defense strategy. And then, and this is the important part, we'll connect it all back to what it means for you. So, let's set the scene. This wasn't just, a bad day on the stock market. It was way more than that. What we saw was this wild collision of events that, on the surface, seemed totally unrelated. But they were creating these ripple effects that just made everything bigger and more intense. I mean, just think about this for a second. In one single day, you have a massive Supreme Court ruling on presidential power, a brand new global tariff threat fired right back, the takedown of a major cartel kingpin, and an AI-fueled stock crash that people are literally calling a software apocalypse. Any one of those would be the top story for a week. We got them all in one day. And the spark that really lit the whole fuse? It was this huge constitutional showdown. We're talking the Supreme Court versus the White House. A real clash of titans over who really controls the power to tax and trade. And right at the heart of this whole thing was this law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Now, this is the key piece of legislation the administration had been using to slap on tariffs. The logic was, they could declare national emergency, say over fentanyl trafficking, and then use this law to act. But then, the Supreme Court came in and dropped a bombshell 6-3 ruling. And this table, it really lays out the core of the fight perfectly. On one side, the administration was saying, hey, IEEPA gives us these broad emergency powers to do things like tariffs. But the court, with Chief Justice Roberts leading, basically said, not so fast. They pointed out that the Constitution gives the power to tax, and tariffs are taxes only to Congress. The bottom line here is that the court said the president couldn't use this emergency law as a workaround to get past Congress on trade. Well, the response from the White House was, let's just say it was swift, and it was not subtle. President Trump didn't hold back at all, saying he was deeply disappointing and even ashamed of some justices for not having the courage to do what he felt was right. I mean, that quote really tells you everything you need to know about the tension between the White House and the judiciary at that moment. But here's the thing. It didn't stop there. Not by a long shot. Instead of just accepting the court's decision, the administration did an immediate pivot. They announced a brand new, sweeping 15% global tariff, but this time they used a different, much older law, Section 122 of the Trade Act from 1974. So instead of things calming down, this whole trade fight just escalated into a completely new and honestly a much more unpredictable phase. Okay, so all this political whiplash happening in D.C., it spilled right over onto Wall Street. That uncertainty from the tariff fight, it was like pouring gasoline on an economic fire that was already starting to burn. And the thing is, the day had already started on shaky ground. The GDP numbers for the end of 2025 came out, and growth was just 1.4%. I mean, to put that in perspective, analysts were expecting more than double that at 2.9%. So that big miss, it set this really anxious, nervous tone for the markets before the opening bell even rang. And just as everyone's trying to figure out the politics in the weak economy, a second shockwave hits. But this one didn't come from Washington. It came from Silicon Valley. And it was a stark reminder of just how fast artificial intelligence can completely turn a corporate giant upside down. So get this. It all kicks off with a simple blog post from an AI company called Anthropic. They announced a new tool that can automatically update something called legacy code. Now, this is the old, clunky, but absolutely critical software that huge institutions like banks and governments are built on. Investors instantly saw this as a direct threat to a huge, profitable part of IBM's business. And the reaction was immediate. By 2 p.m., IBM stock was just tanking. And by the end of the day, poof, over $30 billion in market value was just gone. So you've got political chaos smashing into economic fear.
And if that wasn't enough drama for one day, we also saw huge moves on the global security front. It was just another reminder of how interconnected and how fragile our world really is. Over the weekend, Mexican forces, with some help from U.S. intelligence, took out El Mencho. This guy was the head of the super-violent Jalisco cartel, one of the most wanted drug lords on the planet. And his death immediately set off a firestorm of revenge. Cartel gunmen started torching buildings in major cities like Guadalajara and even the tourist hotspot Puerto Vallarta. It got so bad, airlines started canceling flights, and the U.S. Embassy was telling Americans to just shelter in place. And this just perfectly shows that direct link between what happens over the border and concerns here at home, right? Because now experts are worried this chaos could push a new wave of migrants to flee the violence. At the exact same time, halfway around the globe, tensions with Iran were hitting a fever pitch. You had the U.S. moving serious naval power into the area. We're talking 2 aircraft carriers. And how did Iran respond? By shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, a critical oil choke point, for live-fire military drills. All of this was happening while these last-ditch nuclear talks were going on in Geneva. It really felt like both sides were getting ready for a fight. So all of these threats, from the Mexican border to the Middle East, they formed the backdrop for a major announcement: the release of a new national defense strategy. And this wasn't just a minor update. This signaled a really fundamental shift in how America sees its role in the world. And at the core of this new strategy is something they're calling the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so the original Monroe Doctrine from way back when was basically America telling European powers, hey, stay out of our hemisphere. This new corollary takes that idea and puts it on steroids. It's an explicit plan to, 1, restore American military dominance right here in the Western Hemisphere, 2, protect the homeland above all else, and 3, make sure our adversaries, think China and Russia, can't set up shop in our neighborhood. And this chart, it really makes the change crystal clear. The new strategy is pivoting away from focusing on Europe and Russia. The new top priorities? Homeland security and operations to counter drugs and illegal migration. There's also this huge emphasis on something called burden shifting, which is basically telling our allies in Europe and other places, you need to step up and pay more for your own defense. Okay, wow. So we've talked about the Supreme Court, tariffs, a tech meltdown, cartel wars, and a whole new defense doctrine. It is a lot to take in. So let's try to pull all these threads together and talk about the bottom line. What does a crazy day like this actually mean for you? Look, if you're a busy parent or you're working a full-time job, you're not sitting around all day trading stocks or debating constitutional law, right? You're trying to manage the family budget, save for retirement, and just keep everyone safe. So what are the real practical takeaways from all this? Okay, first off, what happens in Washington absolutely has real-world consequences for your 401k. That fight over tariffs created a ton of uncertainty. And if there's one thing the market hates, it's uncertainty. Second, that IBM story, that's a massive wake-up call. AI isn't some science fiction thing anymore. It is a seriously disruptive force that can reshape entire industries practically overnight. Third, when things get this volatile, it's often those boring but essential companies, the ones that make things you use every day or provide stable infrastructure, that become a safe harbor in your portfolio. And finally, remember this. What happens down in Mexico or in the Strait of Hormuz doesn't just stay there. These global risks can hit you directly, everywhere from the price you pay for gas to whether the stuff you ordered is on the shelf. And all of this, it leaves us with one final really big question that this single chaotic day forces us to ask. In a world where politics, technology, and global security are all colliding with each other like this, is the real economy, the part that actually makes stuff and provides services, is it strong enough to pull through and win? That's the question we're all left wrestling with.